Today we're looking at all the rumors and uncertainties surrounding the Montreal Canadiens. A few weeks ago they were battling for the Stanley Cup, 3 wins away. Today they face all kinds of uncertainty on what this team is going to look like next year. Where will Carey Price end up? Will he go to the Kraken? Will guys like Phillip Danault or Tomas Tatar, Jonathan Drouin, Yoel Armia, will any of them be back? And what happens to Shea Weber? Can they replace him if he's not going to be able to play? We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned today, we're looking at all the rumors and uncertainties surrounding the Montreal Canadiens. It's amazing to think that this team just a few weeks ago was 3 wins away from winning a Stanley Cup, the first since 93, would have been the first cup in Canada since 93, getting all kinds of praise about how good their playoffs were, even though they had a somewhat of a disappointing end to the regular season that really turned things on. And now here we sit with all these question marks, with guys like Price and Weber, their leadership team and longtime players, suddenly clouded with uncertainty. Will they even be back in Montreal? Will Shea Weber even continue to play at all? We're going to try to deep dive here on some of those questions and figure out what might happen here. Now, first up with Carey Price in Seattle, many believe that it's a little bit of a game of chicken here between Bergevin and Ron Francis. Now, Elliot Friedman this morning on his latest 31 Thoughts podcast went on to say that he feels something happened between the two GMs as they discussed what player the Kraken will be taking from Montreal. Now, it's believed that they were very interested in Jake Allen. The Habs were really uncomfortable losing him, given how well he played in Carey Price's absence this past year. When he was injured, he was really, you could argue, maybe even the better regular season goaltender. But of course, Carey Price played in the playoffs, got the job done, and was at his peak form that we've seen in a long time, and got them all the way to the Stanley Cup final. Was a huge part of that success. Now, of course, they explored trading Jake Allen. That wasn't really something Bergevin wanted to do. So they talked about maybe making a deal to have them lay off their goaltenders. Now, it's believed when Jake was going to be the one exposed that the price from Seattle to not take him was going to be a fairly high-ranking prospect and a second-round pick. That's what Friedman reported this morning. The Habs felt that was a little bit too rich. We're not really comfortable with doing that, making that kind of deal. And then really at the last minute, which was technically even past the deadline for players to waive their no-move clauses, Carey Price had the idea and approach to Habs himself about waiving his no-move clause because of his pending health issues. He has hip and knee injuries that he wants to get sought out by doctors this offseason, might require surgery. It's believed that if the surgery is required, it's more likely to be on the knee, but there's a lot of uncertainty there. He's only scheduled to see some specialists as early as Friday, and it might not have any reports available on the status of those injuries prior to the selections being made for the expansion draft. So Seattle's going to have to do their due diligence here. They're likely going to have a conversation with he or his agent to see about where things are at. That's quite a possibility if they're really, really interested. And at this point, we believe they're seriously considering taking Price based on all the reports that are coming out with the information of the insiders are getting from the insiders at Seattle. Now, of course, Ron Francis has the blessing from ownership to take him. If it means putting him up against the cap, or right at the cap level, they're okay with that. I mean, from a marketing standpoint, it would be an absolutely huge pickup for them. I don't think they're worried about the money at all. It's really more so about the on-ice product. So I know that Seattle is going to be a very forward-thinking, analytically driven franchise, which is why a lot of people feel they will not select Price, because the analytics people are probably going to be advising Francis and his team that that's a gamble and a bet that they're probably not going to win, that the analytics are not on Price's side to be able to duplicate regular season play over the remainder of this contract or even the next 3 to 4 years to be at that level that we saw in the playoffs. I mean, the last number of years in Montreal, we've seen him battle a lot of injuries, inconsistency, and you know what? As much as he was the guy in the playoffs, he hasn't been that guy regularly, which has been a problem. And that's why many feel that they're going to end up at the end here, so deciding to pass, even though it's tempting, and go in a different direction. They have lots of other goaltending options to consider. They've got Chris Driedger that they're rumored to be signing out of Florida. There's Kaapo Kähkönen and Minnesota available. You've got some young goaltenders in the Ottawa organization that are interesting, like Joey Daccord, for example. You've got other goaltenders like Jonathan Quick, if you really want a veteran guy. Ben Bishop's available. There's all kinds of names out there. Braden Holtby's another one. Like, all kinds of guys. If you want a mixture of experience and youth or whatever they want to go in, there's all kinds of options out there. There's no shortage of quality players available to the Kraken here. So it's not a given that Carey Price goes. But the other part I found interesting, discussed on the 31 Thoughts podcast this morning, which I've kind of thought about myself a little bit as well, is you have to know that Carey Price obviously completely understands what he's doing here. I mean, I understand he's trying to help the Habs. He didn't want the Habs to be in a bad predicament. If he ends up being out for the first few months of the season or something because of surgery, and if they lose Jake too, he knows the team is kind of screwed in that regard and could be in a really, really tough predicament. He didn't want that to happen. I mean, he's an outstanding person as well and a great teammate that everybody loves. So I can understand why he would want to make that move. But at the same time, he has to understand it's a real chance he's Carey Price. He's one of the greatest goalies of his generation, and that Seattle would likely be very interested in him. So you would think he has to, at the very least, be okay and comfortable with the possibility of being claimed, right? I mean, he would have to be. Otherwise, why would you want to get your name out there and make it a real possibility? I mean, he has to understand who he is and what kind of intrigue he would provide to a brand new franchise starting and building around a guy like him, right? I mean, he's a smart guy. I'm sure he gets that. And like I said, he played his junior hockey in that area for the Tri-City Americans. That's where he met his wife, Angela. So she's got a family in that area. So from a family perspective, it wouldn't be terrible. It's not far from his family in Anaheim, Lake, BC. So like I said before, like if he's going to play anywhere else, from a family perspective, it'd be an awesome fit. So he has to be acknowledging that. So you would think that his heart is still in Montreal, but he has to accept the fact that it's possible and he has to be okay with it. If he's not, you would think he'd be a little bit more skeptical on making this move. But the NHL gave an exception to Montreal, given this new information on the injuries that came after the deadline technically had passed for players to waive their no-move clauses. So, obviously, if there's anything to that that's not completely truthful, they're going to end up in trouble. And that's why I don't feel like there's anything to that, because I know we've heard rumors that a lot of teams are really upset with the Habs. This information that's been coming out about Price and Weber and that they're trying to circumvent the process here for expansion, and I really don't believe that to be the case. But I can understand why teams would look at that. I mean, especially after all the complaining people did about Tampa being $18 million over the cap because of the LTIR usage, and now Montreal, who lost to them in the final, are kind of going to be possibly in the same predicament that they could do the same sort of thing. It's kind of, infuriating if you're another team looking at it from afar going, oh yeah, here we go again, right? But it doesn't mean that there's anything that's not by the book here. So you have to brace yourself with the reports that the Kraken are seriously considering this. So I need to know, Habs fans especially, how you're feeling about this. Can you accept the fact that he could go to Seattle? How are you going to feel if it really does happen? And you have to think, if you're a Kraken fan, that you would absolutely love to build around a guy like Price. So what are your thoughts on what happens? Do they take him? Do they not? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. When it comes to Shea Weber, again, we knew he was dealing with a thumb injury. We know he's dealt with a lot of other knee and foot injuries, especially on the left side, for a long time. So the fact that he may end up on LTIR or possibly have to retire is not shocking news, but it is a little bit surprising to the degree of where things are at with him right now. Again, I think there were some reports that teams were upset with the Habs, thinking that they weren't being completely truthful and forthcoming with the information on Weber in an effort to protect an extra defenseman and leave him open, thinking Seattle won't touch Weber because of all that information. But you know what? You have to think as well, for a guy like Weber, that it's a well-documented scenario that he's dealt with all these injuries throughout his last number of years, and the thumb injury was no big secret either, so I really don't think there's anything to that. Now, does he need to miss significant time? I guess I really can't say, but I guess based on what they're saying, that's the way things look. Could he end up on LTIR for next year or possibly the remainder of that contract? It's a possibility, but at this point, we're really not going to know the answer to that probably until training camp, is what Elliot Friedman is saying. Is once he goes through all his medical stuff on his own this year, he'll have to report to camp, go through the physical testing, and then the NHL can rule on if he qualifies for LTIR or what they can do with that contract, because that's going to also hinder what they can do this offseason. If there's uncertainty over him being on LTIR, can they really go out and replace him? That's certainly not going to be an easy task, because if they have to wait, then they don't know that. I mean, they're going to get other reports and updates medically from him on their own throughout the offseason, I'm sure. So they'll probably have a gut feeling on how it's going to go. But still, that's going to make things difficult to go out and get another defenseman, regardless of how much money they want to spend in that regard. So to me, it might make more sense if they elevate the level of play of Romanov next year and go with the other big three that like Sherrod, Edmondson, and Petrie, and that's your top four next year. Maybe they add some extra added depth that's not so costly and kind of go from there. But the Weber situation and the Price situation certainly clouds a lot of things that their top two leaders here could maybe not be in their lineup when opening night comes around next season. And it's quite something to think about, and it's going to be a major impact on many levels if that's the case. Now, other guys that may not return next year, you have to question the future of Jonathan Drouin. Many feel he needs a fresh start, and what he's been dealing with is likely mental health related. We don't really know that for certain, but there's given the fact that the Habs never really released a physical injury. It was personal, like a personal leave that he was granted. Leads us to think that's likely the case, and that obviously he's faced a lot of scrutiny during his time in Montreal, and maybe he needs a fresh start. He's got tons of talent. He's a great hockey player. He's demonstrated it enough in the past. He still has some time on his contract, over $5 million, and that could be another player that Seattle could consider taking from Montreal. They could say, you know what, we really believe in Drouin. We think a fresh start will do him really well, and we're going to back off a price and we're going to go that route instead. I mean, I think it's less likely, but it is a possible scenario that could unfold, or maybe they do finally make a trade for Danault. Could he end up on LTIR if he's not able to play? That's another possibility, which we really can't answer today. But I think we can say one thing. It's pretty unlikely that Drouin plays for Montreal next year at this point. Now, things could always change. We really don't know, but it's not trending in a good direction, and it might be another player either heading out the door or on LTIR for next year. That brings us to center Phillip Danault, who's going to be commanding a lot on the UFA market. It's believed that right now it's looking like really, really likely that he does not return to the Habs next year. We have information to suggest that the Habs will not be tabling a new contract offer, that the one that they offered him at the beginning of last season, which he rejected, which was a 6-year deal for $5 million per season, so $30 million total. That's probably the best they're going to do. I believe they would still have that on the table if he decides to accept it. But the belief is they're going to let him go explore free agency, see what's out there, and then determine if he wants to try to come back and maybe reconsider the deal that they were offering him and go from there. But there's not going to be any shortage of after how he played in the playoffs. He's a Selke level center iceman who proved that he could be a great shutdown guy in the playoffs, which is very valuable. We saw other players play similar roles like Yanni Gourde, Blake Coleman, and Barclay Goodrow in Tampa. They're also going to be high commodities in this free agent market. Barclay Goodrow is already rumored to be getting a $3.6 million deal for 3 years. For 6 years from the Rangers, which is quite rich for that kind of player, in my opinion, as well. Blake Coleman, I can just imagine he's going to get even more than Goodrow. It's rumored he could get upwards of like $5 million, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But you know what? They're valuable pieces. If teams are willing to pay, that's what it's going to take to get their services. With Danault, there won't be any shortage of a market. I think a team like Columbus would be a team that comes to mind right off the bat, where he'd fit really well with that system and be a top 6 center for them, playing big minutes. I can see them making a comparable offer to get him under contract. I wouldn't rule out Washington as well. If the Capitals trade Kuznetsov and another center doesn't return and they repackage coming back, then they're going to have a hole at center, and I can see them being very interested as well. You can't rule out the teams near the bottom that have tons of space, like the Devils, the Sabres, the Red Wings. I don't know exactly how they'd all feel about him, but they have the room to do it. They could certainly use a player like him. Would he be remotely interested in that? I can't say with certainty, but you never know. I know it's also rumored that the Senators want to bring in another top 6 center, and obviously that's a short drive down the highway. I wonder if they would consider that. I can't say that there's been any linkage right now, but I know it's something that kind of comes to mind as possibly being a good fit. Also, very much a bilingual market, so obviously being a French player bodes well in that sense, and speaking with the French media in the community, so that's a plus. He could be a great role model and guy to help bring the young centers along with the Senators organization, like your Josh Norris or your Shane Pinto, for example. They could use a veteran guy that can upgrade over like a guy like a Chris Tierney, for example. He's not playing really well and could be a major upgrade over a guy like him. So I can see them maybe exploring that. There was rumors they were talking to the Rangers about Ryan Strome, and if you can get Phil Danault, but it also is going to largely depend on term. I mean, I don't see the Sens wanting to give Danault big term. I can see them offering bigger money, but not so much on a longer term basis. So that's questionable on the fit, but I just say they could use a guy like him. Doesn't mean that there's going to be anywhere, near a deal, but I wouldn't be completely shocked if those two ended up talking. But at this point, Phil Danault has likely played his last game in Montreal, likely eaten his last piece of pizza on a press conference on Zoom as well, which is kind of sad. It was a great fit. It was a great run for him there. If this was the end for him, he had a strong finish to his career, and we'll see what free agency brings for him, but it's likely not going to be returning to Montreal. Now, some other players to note, I think some guys like Corey Perry and Yoel Armia have an excellent chance at getting re-signed and staying. Of course, you get Arturi Lekkonen's an RFA, so I think there's a pretty good chance that he gets qualified and signed as well, played a decent role for them. You have to wonder, though, guys like Paul Byron, even though he's under contract, he went through waivers a lot last year. He is exposed to Seattle. I'm not sure if they would consider that if they don't take Price. I think it's a possibility, but I would think that if Price isn't the guy, that maybe it's Brett Kulak. Hard to say what they do here. If Price is not their selection, there's some interesting options, but obviously Lekkonen, Perry, Armia, probably all get re-signed here and all get brought back. That's at least my gut instinct on those guys. I think Tomas Tatar has probably played his last game in Montreal. Didn't really see a lot of action in the playoffs. Seems like a player that they're ready to move on from. Obviously, he was a good piece for a while there, playing with Gallagher and Danault. That was a good trio for quite an extended time. But I think that's kind of run its course. If Danault leaves, Tatar leaves, where does Gallagher fit on the line next year? You have to think, maybe some new line mates for him are in order, obviously. And it's believed that the Habs are going to be wanting to talk to Mike Hoffman as a potential Tatar replacement. He is a guy who they did talk to last year and came close to signing. I think that was probably earlier on, maybe before they got to Foley, but he ended up obviously going to St. Louis, which was believed to be for less money than what Montreal was offering too. But if you look at their wing depth, it's questionable if he's going to be the right guy that they have to go after. They lose Danault. To me, they need another center. They have Suzuki, they have Kakadiemi, they have Jake Evans. If Eric Stahl comes back, maybe that's your four centers next year. That's a possibility, I guess. They could go for an extra winger, but the right side, they've got plenty with guys like Gallagher and Anderson and Caulfield. On you get Toffoli, who can play left or right wing, and then of course you have potentially an open spot there, depending on what they do with Tatar and Armia and those guys. There could be a second, third line left wing spot that's open, and Hoffman would be a good fit there. Obviously help on the power play too, so no guarantee he signs, but I know it's a player that's been rumored that they want to speak to in free agency, assuming he's available when we get there and doesn't re-up in St. Louis, which is believed to be less likely to happen. So we'll have to see what happens, but there's going to be all kinds of change in Montreal. We think that's a fair statement to say 100%, but how extensive will it be? This team could look dramatically different than it did on their last game of the season when they unfortunately lost in the Stanley Cup Final to the Tampa Bay Lightning. So let me know what your thoughts are on all these Habs rumors and what's going to happen. Are Weber and Price done in Montreal? Will these other guys return, or are they all but a given? Drouin, Danault, etc. will be out the door. Another thing as well that Stu Cowan brought up on Twitter is with guys like Danault and Drouin possibly not being back next year, that doesn't really leave a French-Canadian player on the roster. It would be the first time in a really, really long time they didn't have at least one in that regard. So you have to wonder if that's going to be important to them as well, what direction they might go in to find somebody to be that kind of role too. Some people think it shouldn't be a big deal. It should be the best players and the coach shouldn't have to be French and all that. But it's part of their heritage. It's part of their culture. And it's really important in that regard to have guys in the coaching staff or players that can speak the language of the local people. Obviously, French is a very big thing in Quebec and Montreal, and you know what? It's kind of a big thing for them. So it wouldn't be shocking if they find a way to add that into the roster in some capacity as well, if those guys do indeed end up leaving town. So let me know your thoughts down below. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news and rumors on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.